neighbors, as you've no doubt figured out by now, Jesse, CodedLockFilms, is visiting for a weekend, and as he has been doing this, we have had the opportunity to experience some of each other's favorite stories. And so we're going to do a couple of reviews, one for my channel and one for his channel, where we look at those reviews from both a veteran's perspective and a newbie's perspective. So for me, I just finished reading one of his favorite comics, Superman Red Son, and we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it my absolute favorite. I'd have to think about which one I would call my absolute favorite.
Right.
That's like top 10.
But it's one of them.
Yes,
yeah, definitely one of them. And I can see why. I didn't come to this from the point of view of someone who knows a lot about Superman, because I never really read comics. I'm not really into the superhero genre. I just never really got into it. So I knew like some cursory information about Superman, but I wasn't really into the mythology. But it doesn't really seem to matter.
Yeah, what I like about it is that it is very accessible to the layman, and it's just sort of the only thing it really assumes that you know is just like basic things like, you know, like who Superman is, and you know, like I mean, everybody knows who Superman is and kind of what he stands for.
Yeah.
And what this comic basically does is the premise of the whole graphic novel is that it's an Elseworlds tale, where instead of Superman's ship crash landing in Smallville, it actually reaches Earth 12 hours later and ends up in Soviet Russia. And so he grows up still being the same person, but having a very different set of values sort of taught to him.
And you see a lot of the same characters. You've got Lois Lane, you've got Lex Luthor, you've got some of the other superheroes like Batman and the Green Lantern, and they're still the same people, but they spent time in a very different environment, and that is clear. And for me personally, I really like what-if stories. I like to look at I like to look at like history, how it could have turned out differently. Of course, you know that from listening to my brain crack idea. And this is kind of along those same lines. It's a fictional world, but it's a fictional world imagined a little bit differently. Like, what would have happened if Superman had grown up with communist ideas instead of capitalist or American ideals?
And it's interesting to see that everyone in this story is very much the same person as they are at the core. Like they don't really change as people. Like Lex Luthor doesn't change as a person. Superman doesn't change as a person. But what makes it different is that they have different ideas about how to go about things, and you know, like what the proper way is to achieve their ends. Like Superman still wants to work towards the betterment of all mankind, but he comes to it from a very communist perspective in this story. And you know, Lex Luthor still wants a lot of power for himself, but he has sort of different reasons for wanting it in this story. I love how they treat Batman in this story as well.
Yeah.
The way that they have Batman portrayed in this story is very, very interesting. Rather than being someone who necessarily fights against crime, he still fights against wrongdoings, but more governmental wrongdoings and the wrongdoings of leaders.
He's basically like a freedom fighter, like almost an anarchist in a way.
He's a terrorist in this story.
Yeah.
You know that,
Yeah,
which
basically.
is kind of, you know, it just sort of the whole thing is sort of about showing you, you know, different sides of the same coin.
Well, in Batman, I mean, my perception of Batman is that he always kind of walked that fine line between a do-gooder and a terrorist.
And this portrayal is sort of more of him over on the other side of the line than on the side that he's traditionally depicted as.
Yeah.
And on top of all that, I just really love the artwork in this story. I mean, that's something you got to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. But we'll talk about it after this, Carly's. It's very visually interesting, and one of the problems that I often have with comics and graphic novels is that I have a hard time keeping all the characters straight, because a lot of them are drawn to look alike, and this doesn't do that. Like, I never had any trouble keeping the characters straight.
Yeah, everyone is very, very distinctive. I think that that DC generally does a pretty good job of that sort of thing. There's more iconography in a lot of ways with DC, which is not to say that Marvel doesn't have, you know, or other comic studios don't have iconography. It's just that, you know, DC has a lot of those, like, ta-da kind of superheroes. I can't really think of a word other than describe it.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty appropriate way to describe it. And I think what I really do like about this comic is that you've got, of course, just like in the Cold War, capitalist ideas fighting communist ideas, but it's not like one is absolutely right and one is absolutely wrong. Because we're looking at Superman from the communist perspective, you can see that it's not an absolute wrong. It's not an absolute evil that needs to be fought against. Things aren't absolutely black and white. It kind of paints everything with more of a gray, a morally gray brush. And so we can see some of the good aspects of communism along with some of the bad aspects, and the same can be said for capitalism.
And you can understand, like, I think that the best My favorite superhero tales are the ones that make you understand the perspectives of the superhero and the supervillain equally. Mm-hmm. And I think that really is done very, very well.
Very
in this,
well.
which is why
Very
this
well
is
in
one
this.
of my favorites.
So, on the whole, I really enjoyed Superman Red Son. I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're a fan of the Superman genre, but even if you're not, it really is a fascinating look at what could have been for the Superman genre, and on the worth meter, I would give this a worth owning new.
Yeah, for me, this is an ultimate recommendation. As I said, this is one of my favorites.
All right, and that about does it for this book review of Superman Red Son with CodedLockFilms. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, and if you'd like to see us talking a little bit about Back to the Future, you can go check out today's video on my channel, which is
CodedLockFilms.
Yes. As if we hadn't said it enough already.
Yeah, exactly. All right, until tomorrow, everybody. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Basically like a freedom fighter, freedom fighter.
That's not the first time you've made that.
No, it's not.
mistake,
That one comes up a lot.